The ancient human supercarrier Avalon drifted silently in the Hades Nebula. Its massive hull was barely visible against the cosmic dust and radiation that had hidden it for 2 centuries. The ship was a relic of humanity's former glory, a weapon of unimaginable power that had helped fight the Century War. Now it floated, dormant and forgotten, a ghost of the past. Inside the command bridge, emergency lights suddenly flickered on. A single cryopod among hundreds hissed open, releasing a cloud of cold vapor. The preservation fluid drained away as the pod systems completed the revival process. Commander Juan Park gasped as her lungs filled with air for the first time in 200 years. Her vision blurred, then slowly focused on the dim red emergency lights overhead. Her hands trembled as she wiped the cold condensation from her face. Her muscles protested after 2 centuries of disuse, but the military-grade cryopreservation had done its job. She was alive. Juan pulled herself out of the pod, her wet uniform clinging to her body. The bridge was dark, with only emergency power functioning. The air smelled stale and metallic. As her eyes adjusted, she saw the bodies. The skeleton crew, meant to maintain the ship during its long sleep, remained at their stations. Time had mummified them, leaving only dry husks in uniform. She approached the nearest corpse, a navigator according to his insignia. A small hole in his temple told the story. When the end came, they had chosen their own way out. "Prometheus, status report," she croaked, her voice hoarse from centuries of disuse. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the ship's AI stuttered to life, its holographic interface flickering blue against the darkness of the bridge. "Commander Park," said a deep male voice that sounded almost surprised. "Systems at 12% capacity. 200 years, 47 days since emergency shutdown protocol was initiated." Juan steadied herself against a console. Why was I awakened? Automatic revival protocols were triggered by proximity alert and power restoration thresholds. Prometheus replied. The ship detected a surge of energy that matched known human signatures. Juan moved to the captain's chair, brushing dust from the control panel. Her fingers, growing steadier, danced across the still functional terminal. The ship's database was intact, including news archives collected before the shutdown. The story they told made her blood run cold. After the Century War had fractured humanity's interstellar empire, their defenses were weak. The Galactic Coalition, an alliance of alien species that had watched the humans tear themselves apart, saw their opportunity. They offered peace and protection to the war-weary colonies. What came instead was subjugation. Earth was now a protectorate of the Coalition. Humanity's colonies faced strict technology restrictions. Resource quotas drained their worlds. Humans had become second-class citizens in their own territory. They promised peace, Juan whispered, scanning through report after devastating report. They lied. "Commander, life support is only functioning in the bridge section," Prometheus informed her. "Main reactor is at minimal output. Weapons systems offline. Navigation offline. Communications at 30% capacity, short range only." Juan closed her eyes, trying to process everything. She had gone to sleep expecting to wake to a rebuilt human civilization. Instead, she had awakened to its ruins. Why didn't the other command staff revive? She asked. Their pods malfunctioned during the power failure in year 26 of dormancy, Prometheus explained. You are the only surviving senior officer. Juan stood, moving to the viewport. Outside, the nebula glowed in shades of purple and blue, hiding the massive ship from detection. The Avalon had been humanity's greatest achievement, a supercarrier 2 kilometers long, housing enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Now it was a derelict, a shadow of its former self. "Show me ship schematics. What systems can we bring online with current power levels?" As Prometheus displayed the ship's layout, highlighting the functioning sections in green, a new alert sounded. The AI's voice took on a tone of urgency. "Commander, I'm detecting a distress signal. Human encryption patterns, resistance vessel classification. "Put it through," Juan ordered. The audio crackled through the bridge speakers. "To any human ships, this is Captain Juno of the Resistance vessel Defiant. We are under attack by Coalition patrol ships in Sector 7 to 93. Engines damage. Cannot escape. If anyone can hear this." The transmission cut to static, then resumed. "They're boarding. We're going to scuttle the ship. Long live free humanity." Juwan's hands tightened into fists. 200 years had passed, but some things remained the same. Bullies attacking the weak. The strong dominating the vulnerable. "Can we trace that signal?" she asked. "Yes, Commander. The source is approximately 3 light hours from our position. And our engines. The quantum drive is intact, but requires restart protocols. Conventional engines are at 40% capacity." Juwan looked around the bridge at the dead crew, then up at the holographic display of the ship. The Avalon had been built to protect humanity. That purpose hadn't changed, even if everything else had. "Prometheus, initiate revival protocols for engineering crew in sections 5 through 9. Reroute power to life support in those areas. Begin diagnostics on weapon systems and engines. Commander, full revival will alert nearby systems to our presence," Prometheus warned. "The Avalon's power signature will be detected." "Good," Juwan said, her jaw set with determination. "It's time the Coalition remembered why they feared us." She walked back to the captain's chair, brushing aside 2 centuries of dust, and sat down. The command console lit up, recognizing her authority. "Set course for the distress signal origin. Best possible speed. That will require main reactor restart," Prometheus noted. "Then restart it," Juwan ordered. "The Avalon was built for war, Prometheus. And war has found us again." As systems began powering up around her, Juwan felt the massive ship trembling back to life. Lights flickered on across the bridge. Air circulation systems hummed. Deep in the ship's heart, the reactor core began to glow once more. "Prometheus, initiate revival protocols," she commanded, her voice stronger now. "The Avalon returns to war." The Supercarrier's engines flared for the first time in 2 centuries, pushing the massive vessel forward. As it accelerated away from its hiding place, the nebula's dust swirled in its wake, revealing the gleaming hull that bore the scars of humanity's last great conflict, and now headed toward its next. The hum of machinery echoed through the vast chambers of the Avalon. Combat drones moved with purpose through the massive hangars, their mechanical arms working to repair systems that had been dormant for centuries. Some welded broken panels, others replaced damaged circuit boards, and a few transported new parts from the fabrication bay. The ship was slowly coming back to life. Commander Juwan Park stood on the bridge, watching holographic displays that showed the progress of repairs throughout the Supercarrier. Her uniform was now clean and proper, though it followed a design 2 centuries out of date. In the 24 hours since her revival, she had managed to awaken 37 crew members from cryo-sleep, mostly engineers and technical staff needed to restore the ship's functions. "Reactor output now at 53% and climbing," reported Prometheus. The ship's eye. Its holographic form floated beside Juwan, a blue humanoid shape with lines of code occasionally running across its surface. Life support restored to decks 1 through 17. Main weapon systems still offline. "And the quantum drive?" Juwan asked. "Diagnostic complete. The quantum drive needs a new stabilization matrix," Prometheus reported. "We cannot make the jump to light speed without it. The existing matrix suffered degradation during the long dormancy." Juwan nodded, though this complicated matters significantly. Without faster-than-light capability, the Avalon would be limited to this star system. A supercarrier that couldn't travel between systems was little more than a floating fortress. "Can we build one?" she asked. "Not with current resources," Prometheus replied. "The materials required are not available on board." Juwan turned her attention back to the recovered data logs from the ship's computers. The records told a grim story of humanity's fall after the Century War. The Galactic Coalition, led by the technologically advanced Vrax, had initially offered peace and protection to the weakened human worlds. What followed was a systematic stripping of human autonomy. First came the technology regulation. Vrax officials confiscating advanced weapons in the name of safety. Then resource-sharing programs that redirected human mining output to Coalition worlds. Finally, direct control of human governments by Coalition advisors. The pattern repeated across all former human territories. Commander, called Ensign Jai, one of the communications officers. The resistance vessel is approaching. They've responded to our hailing signals and are requesting emergency docking. Grant permission and prepare medical teams, Juwan ordered. How many life signs? 17, several showing critical readings. On the tactical display, Juwan watched as the small resistance ship limped toward the Avalon. It was barely larger than one of the Supercarrier shuttles and clearly cobbled together from salvaged parts. Plasma scorches marked its hull where Coalition weapons had hit it. One engine was completely dark, the other flickering dangerously. They're not going to make it to the hangar, Prometheus warned. Engine failure imminent. Engage tractor beams, Juwan commanded. Blue energy beams extended from the Avalon's underside, gently capturing the resistance vessel and drawing it into the massive hangar bay. Even with half its systems still offline, the Supercarrier's technology was centuries ahead of anything currently in use. Juwan left the bridge, taking a lift down to the hangar deck. By the time she arrived, the resistance crew was being helped out of their damaged ship by Avalon medical personnel. Most looked malnourished and wore mismatched clothing that served as makeshift uniforms. Many stared in awe at the vast hangar that could easily hold 100 ships like theirs. A tall man with a deep scar across his cheek appeared to be their leader. He stepped forward unsteadily, still weak from the attack. His eyes widened as he recognized the insignia on Juwan's uniform. "I'm Commander Juwan Park of the Earth Fleet Supercarrier Avalon," she said, offering a formal salute. The man's mouth fell open. "The Avalon," he whispered. "We thought it was destroyed in the Battle of Proxima." "Not destroyed," Juwan replied. "Just waiting." "Captain Dodium Lee of the resistance vessel Defiant," the man said, returning the salute with a shaking hand. "Or what's left of it." He glanced back at his ruined ship. "Your crew will receive medical attention," Juwan assured him. "Come with me to the briefing room. I need information." As they walked through the corridors of the Avalon, Do-Yun stared at everything like a man seeing ghosts. His fingers traced the wall panels, the design of which hadn't been used in ship construction for over a century. "This is really happening," he muttered. The legends were true. In the briefing room, Juwan called up a star map showing human territories. "I need to understand the current situation. The ship's records only go up to the early occupation period." Do-Yun's expression hardened. "Commander, the Coalition is stripping our colonies bare. Talos IV lost half its population to labor camps last month. New Terra has been mining iridium for 20 years, with nothing to show for it but poverty." He pointed to various systems on the map, describing their fate. Eden Prime, its atmosphere poisoned by Coalition mining. Hawking's World, its population relocated to make room for Vrax colonists. Earth itself, technically free but surrounded by defensive Coalition outposts that controlled all traffic in and out. "The resistance operates in cells," Do-Yun explained. "We strike where we can, but we're outgunned and outnumbered. The Coalition has banned humans from owning any ship with weapons. My illegal laser cannons are why they were hunting us." Juwan pulled up the tactical display, showing Coalition patrol routes that Prometheus had extrapolated from the resistance ship's navigational data. The patrols were methodical, designed to maintain complete control over human space. "Tell me about your ship," she said. "Where did you get it?" "Built it ourselves, from scraps mostly. The Coalition destroys any human vessels they discover that aren't registered. And registration means inspections, tracking, and limited range." Do-Yun clenched his fist. We're prisoners in our own star systems. Juwan was silent for a long moment. The oath she had taken 2 centuries ago was to protect a human interstellar empire that no longer existed. The government that had commissioned the Avalon was gone. Technically, she was without orders, without a chain of command. "I swore an oath to protect an empire that no longer exists," she said quietly. "But perhaps humanity still needs the Avalon one last time." Dodium leaned forward. "Commander, with this ship, we could change everything. The Avalon is a legend. Just the knowledge that it survived would give people hope." Before Juwan could respond, Prometheus appeared in the center of the room. "Commander, sensors detect 3 Coalition patrol vessels entering the system. Their trajectory suggests they are tracking the Resistance ship." Juwan stood. "Time to see what this old ghost can still do. Do-Yun, your knowledge of current Coalition tactics would be valuable on the bridge." As they hurried back toward the command deck, Do-Yun asked, "What are your orders, Commander?" Juwan's eyes narrowed. "First, we protect your people. Then we find a quantum stabilization matrix. And then," her voice grew cold, "then we remind the Coalition why humanity was feared." Through the void of space, the Avalon moved like a ghost. Its massive hull, once gleaming with the pride of humanity's military might, was now running dark. The Supercarrier's stealth systems, revolutionary even by modern standards, bent light around its frame and absorbed radar signals, rendering it nearly invisible to detection. Commander Juwan Park stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display as they approached the Coalition outpost. It was a small installation orbiting the gas giant Theseus VII, mainly used for refueling and as a communications relay. More importantly, it contained a warehouse of spare parts, including quantum drive components. "Distance to target, 15,000 kilometers, reported Prometheus. "Still no indication they've detected us." Juwan nodded. "Maintain course. Boarding teams, prepare for deployment." In the 3 weeks since rescuing Captain Do-Yun's Resistance crew, the Avalon had undergone significant repairs. The original crew from cryo-sleep, combined with the Resistance fighters, had managed to restore the ship to 60% functionality. Still not enough for a direct confrontation with a Coalition battle group, but more than enough for a raid. "Coalition outpost still shows normal activity," said Lieutenant Hanna, monitoring communications. "Standard patrol pattern maintained." "Launch fighters on my mark," Juwan ordered. The plan was simple. The Avalon would remain hidden, while squadrons of its automated fighters disabled the outpost's communications and defenses. Then boarding parties would secure the facility and take what they needed. Mark. From the Avalon's launch bays, 12 sleek fighter craft shot forward, their engines barely visible against the darkness of space. They crossed the distance to the outpost in minutes, their attack so sudden that the Coalition forces had no time to send a distress signal. On the tactical display, Juwan watched as the outpost's defensive weapons went offline, one by one. "Defenses neutralized," reported Prometheus. "No distress signals detected." "Launch boarding shuttles," Juwan commanded. 3 shuttles departed the Avalon, carrying 30 soldiers in total, a mix of revived military personnel and Resistance fighters, all equipped with the Supercarrier's advanced weapons. They docked with the outpost's emergency airlocks, breaching the station with surgical precision. "Station secured," came Do-Yun's voice over the comm. "Minimal casualties. We're gathering the components now." But the raid yielded more than just spare parts. The boarding team discovered a treasure trove of intelligence: Coalition patrol schedules, fleet deployments, and technical schematics. 2 hours later, back aboard the Avalon, Minji Kang pored over the stolen data. A former Resistance engineer who joined the crew, she had an innate understanding of starship design. Her eyes widened as she examined the Coalition vessel blueprints. "Their ships use our technology," she said, pointing to the recovered schematics displayed on the screen. "These engine configurations, they're from our Artemis-class cruisers. They've just modified them." Juwan looked over her shoulder, studying the designs. The coalition vessels incorporated elements clearly derived from human engineering, though altered to hide their origin. They beat us with our own weapons. Juan nodded grimly. Not just engines. Minji continued, flipping through more schematics. Shield harmonics, weapon targeting systems, all based on human designs. They must have captured our ships after the Century War and reverse-engineered everything. This discovery hardened Juwan's resolve. Not only had the coalition subjugated humanity, but they had done so using stolen human technology. It was another layer of insult added to centuries of injury. The success of the first raid emboldened the Avalon's crew. With the acquired quantum stabilization matrix, the supercarrier's faster-than-light capabilities were restored. This opened up new possibilities for attack and evasion. Their next target was more ambitious, a coalition archive station in the Helios sector. Intelligence suggested it contained historical records that might reveal strategic weaknesses in the coalition structure. The raid was executed with the same precision as the first. The Avalon appeared seemingly from nowhere, its fighter squadrons disabling the station's defenses before a boarding party secured the facility. This time, however, they discovered something even more valuable than expected. The coordinates of Forge Station, a mothballed human shipyard hidden in the unstable Morrow system. It was abandoned during the final days of the Century War, explained Prometheus, displaying the station's specifications. Its location was classified at the highest level. The gravitational disturbances in the Morrow system make it nearly impossible to detect without exact coordinates. A shipyard, Juan breathed, understanding the implications. We could build a fleet. As the Avalon moved from system to system, executing surgical strikes against coalition targets, word of its return spread through underground channels. The supercarrier became a symbol of hope, a legend come to life. Former military personnel who had been forced into civilian life, engineers who had been denied the right to practice their craft, and colonists who had suffered under coalition rule, all found their way to the Avalon. The crew grew from dozens to hundreds. The supercarrier, designed to house thousands, had plenty of room. More importantly, it had purpose. Every new arrival brought skills, information, and a burning desire for freedom. On the coalition capital world of Prime, a planet of gleaming spires and artificial perfection, the High Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from the 12 dominant species gathered in the Grand Chamber, their voices raised in alarm. These attacks cannot be dismissed as isolated incidents, said Councillor Jur of the Tellarites. 3 outposts in as many weeks, with no survivors or distress signals. The pattern suggests military precision, added Councillor Bren of the Andorians. No resistance cell has ever demonstrated such capability. High Chancellor Vrex, leader of the Vrax and head of the coalition, rose from his seat. His scaled skin glistened under the chamber lights, and his 4 eyes narrowed with anger. This human problem must be addressed immediately, he insisted, slamming his fist on the table. We cannot allow dissent to spread. If the rumors are true, if this is indeed a warship from their past, we must crush it before others are inspired by its example. At the far end of the chamber, Admiral Taho Kim sat silently. One of the few humans to achieve rank in the coalition forces, he had spent decades proving his loyalty, suppressing his own people to advance his career. Now, as reports of the mysterious vessel flooded in, his loyalties were increasingly divided. The vessel in the reports matched descriptions of the legendary Avalon, a supercarrier he had studied in military history. If it had somehow survived, if it was truly operational again, the balance of power might shift dramatically. Admiral Kim, Chancellor Vrex's voice cut through his thoughts. You will lead the task force to hunt down this human vessel. Your knowledge of their tactics will be valuable. Taho stood and bowed, the perfect picture of a loyal officer. It will be done, Chancellor. But as he left the chamber, his mind raced with conflicting thoughts. If the Avalon had returned, did he stand with his people or with the empire that had given him power by betraying them? Far away, In the darkness of space, the Avalon continued its journey toward the Morrow system and the forgotten shipyard that might change the fate of humanity. Forge Station hung in orbit around the unstable star of the Morrow system. Once the pride of humanity's shipbuilding capability, it had drifted abandoned for 2 centuries. Its massive frame was shaped like a giant ring, with dry docks extending outward like spokes on a wheel. Solar flares from the unpredictable star bathed the station in radiation that would have killed any unprotected crew, but also served to hide it from casual detection. The Avalon approached cautiously, its sensors scanning for any signs of Coalition presence. Finding none, the Supercarrier docked with the main hub of Forge Station. Massive connection tubes extended from the Avalon, linking it to the dormant shipyard. Commander Juan Park led the first team aboard. Their footsteps echoed through empty corridors that hadn't felt human presence since the Century War. Emergency lights flickered on automatically as they advanced, power systems responding to their presence after 200 years of sleep. "Incredible," whispered Do-yeon as they reached the main control center. "It's like they just walked away yesterday." Min-ji Kang, now the Avalon's chief engineer, immediately went to work on the central computer systems. Her fingers danced across control panels, bringing ancient screens to life. "The automated systems are dormant but intact," she reported, her face lit by the glow of the displays. The station was designed to hibernate until reactivation codes were transmitted. She looked up at Juan with excitement in her eyes. "We can wake it up." Over the next 3 days, teams from the Avalon worked tirelessly to restore Forge Station to functionality. Reactor cores hummed back to life. Assembly lines were cleared of dust. Raw material processors were checked and recalibrated. On the 4th day, Min-ji entered the station's command center with a wide smile. "Production can begin within the week," she reported to Juan. "The fabricators still work. We've run diagnostics on all primary systems." "What can we build?" Juan asked, studying the schematics of the station displayed on the main screen. "With the materials already stored here, at least 6 frigates," Min-ji replied. "And once we bring in more resources, we could potentially construct another supercarrier, though that would take months." Juan nodded, considering their options. The Avalon was powerful, but it was still just one ship. A fleet, even a small one, would dramatically increase their chances against the Coalition. "Begin production of the frigates," she ordered. "Priority on speed and stealth capabilities." As work on Forge Station progressed, the Avalon continued its campaign of strategic raids. Each successful operation brought more defectors to their cause. The Supercarrier's crew now numbered over 800, a mix of awakened cryo-sleepers and modern resistance fighters. Word of their successes spread beyond human worlds. Other species suffering under Coalition rule began to take notice. Among them were the Ceridians, a proud race of warriors who had been subjugated 50 years earlier. Ambassador Kyuk of the Ceridian resistance arrived on the Avalon in a small, unmarked transport. Tall and lean, with distinctive ridge-like markings on his face, he carried himself with the dignity of a people who had never accepted defeat. "Commander Park," he greeted Juan formally in the conference room. "My people have heard of your victories against the Coalition. We are interested in your methods." "We share a common enemy," Juan replied diplomatically. "Perhaps we also share common goals." The discussion lasted hours, ranging from tactical opportunities to post-Coalition political structures. Hyuk was impressed by the Avalon, but remained cautious. "Your supercarrier is impressive," he said, studying the holographic display of the vessel. "But the Coalition fleet outnumbers us 1,000 to 1. 3 raids, even successful ones, do not make a revolution." "Numbers aren't everything," Juan replied confidently. "Not when you have the element of surprise. And now, with Forge Station, we'll have ships as well." The alliance was sealed with a formal agreement. The Ceridians would provide intelligence and support in their sector, while the Avalon would supply advanced weapons and eventually ships from Forge Station. But surprise was a luxury they soon lost. On the Coalition capital world of Prime, Admiral Sunwoo paced before the assembled War Council. Unlike Admiral Taho Kim, Sunwoo was not human. He was Vrax, like the Chancellor, and had built his reputation hunting down resistance cells. More importantly, he was a veteran of the Century War, one of the few still in active service. "It's the Avalon," he announced, manipulating the display to show attack patterns from the recent raids. "The tactics, the precision, the ghosting technique, I recognize them from the Battle of Proxima. The Avalon has returned, and I know how to trap it." His plan was simple but effective. Using intelligence gathered from monitoring stations, he identified a pattern in the Avalon's movements. The Supercarrier required regular supply runs to sustain its growing crew, and these followed predictable routes to avoid Coalition patrols. "We will catch them at their most vulnerable," Sunwoo declared, "when they believe themselves most safe." The trap was set at Kelper's moon, a small rocky satellite orbiting a gas giant. The Avalon had used its shadow twice before to mask supply transfers from resistance freighters. The ambush came during what should have been a routine supply run. The Avalon was in position, its shields lowered to speed the transfer of goods from 3 resistance vessels, when Coalition ships appeared from behind Kelper's moon, their weapons already firing. On the bridge, Juwon reacted instantly. Shields up. Break away from the supply ships. Evasive pattern Delta. The Avalon's engines roared to life, but not before several Coalition energy torpedoes struck its exposed hull. Alarms blared as compartments decompressed and power fluctuated. "Direct hit to primary shield generator," reported Prometheus. "Hull breach on decks 12 through 14. Weapon systems at 40% capacity." Juwon gripped the command chair as another volley rocked the ship. "Return fire. All available weapons. Target their lead vessel." The Avalon's massive cannons responded, cutting through a Coalition cruiser with devastating effect. But there were too many enemy ships, all positioning for clear shots at the wounded Supercarrier. "Quantum jump," Juwon ordered. "Drive charging," Prometheus replied. 30 seconds to jump capability. It was the longest 30 seconds of Juwon's life. The Avalon shuddered under continued assault, more systems failing with each hit. When the jump finally came, they barely escaped as another volley of torpedoes passed through the space they had occupied. Hours later, the Avalon drifted in deep space, far from any charted system. Repair drones swarmed over the hull breaches like insects, welding and patching. Inside, the medical bay was filled with injured crew members. In the damaged bridge, Juwon studied the tactical replay of the ambush. The Coalition ships had known exactly where to wait, exactly when the Avalon would arrive. "We have a traitor," she concluded grimly. "Someone transmitted our flight plan." "I've analyzed all communications from the Avalon," Prometheus reported. No unauthorized transmissions were detected. Then it came from one of the resistance cells, or, Juwon's eyes narrowed, the Ceridians. The damage reports were dire. The quantum drive was offline again. Weapons systems were severely compromised. At least 40 crew members were dead, with dozens more injured. With options running out, Juwon made her way to a sealed section of the ship. Using her command override, she entered a chamber that had remained locked even during the ship's revival. Inside was a single control console with a distinctive red interface. "Prometheus," she called. "Activate the temporal displacement system." The AI's holographic form appeared beside her, its expression concerned. "Commander, that technology was deemed too dangerous to deploy even during the Century War," it cautioned. "The potential for catastrophic space-time distortions is significant." "We're out of options," Juwon said grimly. "Without it, we'll be hunted down before we can complete repairs. The Coalition knows we exist now. They'll never stop looking." She placed her hand on the activation pad. "Prepare for temporal jump." As the ship's remaining power was diverted to the experimental system, Juwon thought of everything that had led to this moment. The Century War, the long sleep, the subjugation of humanity, the resistance, the hope that the Avalon had inspired. "Target coordinates?" asked Prometheus. Juwan's expression hardened with determination. "The Coalition capital, Prime." The Avalon trembled as energy built up around it, preparing to tear a hole through the fabric of space-time itself. The Coalition capital system of Prime buzzed with activity. 7 planets circled a bright yellow sun, each one serving a specific purpose in the Coalition's grand design. Prime itself, the 3rd planet, was home to the High Council and the central government. Its surface gleamed with crystal towers and artificial landscapes, a showcase of what the Coalition considered perfect civilization. Ships moved between the planets in orderly patterns, following strict flight paths established by the Traffic Control Authority. The massive defense grid, a network of satellites, automated weapon platforms, and patrol vessels, scanned constantly for any unauthorized approach. No vessel could enter the system without passing through multiple checkpoints. No enemy could possibly reach the heart of the Coalition without triggering countless alarms. None of it mattered. Space itself seemed to tear open like fabric ripping apart. A swirling vortex of blue and purple energy formed directly above Prime, mere thousands of kilometers from the planet's surface. From this impossible breach emerged the Avalon, its massive hull scarred from battle, but its weapons glowing with power. Behind it came 6 smaller vessels, the first frigates produced by the reactivated Forge Station, each one bristling with weaponry that hadn't been seen in Coalition space for 2 centuries. On the planet below, automated systems blared warnings. Defense platforms swiveled to target the intruders, but their targeting computers struggled to lock onto ships that, according to all physical laws, should not be there. Patrol vessels scrambled to intercept, but they were too far away, too scattered to mount an effective response. In the Coalition High Council chamber, emergency lights flashed red. Chancellor Vrex and the other council members stared at the tactical display in horror as the human ships appeared in the most heavily defended system in Coalition space. "Impossible," gasped Chancellor Vrex, his scaled skin paling to a sickly yellow. "How did they bypass our defensive perimeter? There are 3 layers of sensor nets, patrol routes. Nothing could slip through." Admiral Sunwoo, who had been providing an update on the hunt for the Avalon when the alarm sounded, stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His 4 eyes blinked rapidly as he processed what he was seeing. "The temporal displacement system," he said quietly. "They actually used it. It was theoretical when I fought them in the Century War. A weapon so dangerous they never deployed it. It doesn't bypass space, it bypasses time itself." Before anyone could respond, every communications device in the chamber activated simultaneously. Holographic screens appeared in the air, terminal displays switched from their normal functions, and even personal communicators lit up with the same image. The face of a human woman appeared on every screen. She wore a dark uniform with rank insignia that hadn't been seen in 2 centuries. Her expression was stern but calm. "Attention Galactic Coalition," she said, her voice transmitting across every communication channel in the system. "I am Commander Juwan Park of the Earth Supercarrier Avalon. For 2 centuries, you have subjugated humanity and other species under the false promise of peace. Today that ends." On the bridge of the Avalon, Juwan stood straight and proud as cameras recorded her message. Around her, the crew worked at their stations, monitoring Coalition responses and keeping weapons locked on key targets below. "We demand autonomy for all subjugated species," she continued. "Coalition forces will withdraw from human territory immediately. You have 1 hour to respond before we demonstrate the Avalon's full capabilities." The transmission cut off, leaving the Coalition leadership staring at each other in stunned silence. Then chaos erupted in the chamber. "Launch all available ships. Activate the planetary shield. We cannot negotiate with terrorists." The voices overlapped as various council members shouted their recommendations. Chancellor Vrex slammed his fist on the table, restoring a semblance of order. "What are our options?" he demanded. Admiral Sunwoo activated the tactical display. "Our fleet is dispersed across Coalition space. We can recall them, but the nearest battle group is 4 hours away at maximum speed. The defense platforms are having difficulty targeting the human ships. Something about their temporal displacement is interfering with our systems. And if we refuse their demands, what is this full capability they threaten us with? Asked Counselor Jer. Admiral Tahoe Kim, who had been silent until now, finally stood. Unlike the other military leaders present, he was human, one of the few to achieve high rank in the coalition forces. His knowledge of human history and warfare had made him valuable, but now it made him dangerous. The humans are not bluffing, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. That ship destroyed 3 star systems during the Century War. It can do the same today. All eyes turned to him. Explain, ordered Chancellor Vrex. The Avalon carries what humans called nova bombs, weapons designed to trigger a stellar collapse. Tahoe explained. They were only used 3 times during the Century War, but each time they destroyed not just the target but the entire star system. One such weapon detonated in our sun would obliterate all 7 planets and every ship in the system. Silence fell over the chamber as the implications sank in. They wouldn't, said Counselor Bren eventually. It would be suicide. They're right above the planet. They'd be destroyed too. Perhaps, Tahoe agreed. But Commander Park has already demonstrated she's willing to use experimental technology that could have destroyed her own ship. The humans have a saying, freedom or death. They might consider mutual destruction preferable to continued subjugation. In the tense hour that followed, the coalition chamber erupted into factions. Hardliners demanded immediate military action, believing the humans were bluffing. Moderates pushed for negotiation, arguing that even if the threat was real, diplomacy could avert disaster. Meanwhile, on the Avalon, Juwan waited. Do-Yeon stood beside her, watching the tactical display as coalition forces scrambled ineffectually. "Do we really have nova bombs?" he asked quietly. "No," Juwan admitted. "They were all used during the war, but they don't know that." "And if they call our bluff?" Juwan's expression remained impassive. "Then we use what we do have. The temporal displacement system can be modified to create a localized time distortion field. We can't destroy the system, but we can render their government center uninhabitable for decades." As the deadline approached, Chancellor Vrex himself opened a channel to the Avalon. His face appeared on the main screen, composed once more into the dignified mask of leadership. "Commander Park," he said formally, "the coalition is prepared to discuss terms." In the background of the transmission, Juwan could see Admiral Tahoe Kim standing among the coalition leaders. Their eyes met briefly across the light years, a moment of understanding passing between them. Standing on the bridge of the ship that had changed the course of human history twice now, Juwan looked out at the stars through the view screen, not as a soldier fighting for a lost empire, but as the architect of a new future. Behind her, the crew of the Avalon watched in silence, aware they were witnessing a pivotal moment. "Then let us begin," she said. In the days that followed, delegates from across coalition space gathered on a neutral station to negotiate the Treaty of Prime. The terms were complex, but the principles were simple. Freedom for subjugated species, dissolution of the forced labor system, and recognition of territorial sovereignty. For humanity, it meant the end of 2 centuries of oppression. For the coalition, it meant transformation from an empire to a true alliance of equals. For Juwan Park, awakened from the past to change the future, it meant fulfilling the oath she had taken long ago, not to an empire, but to her people. The Avalon remained in orbit above Prime throughout the negotiations, a reminder of what happens when peace is built on subjugation rather than respect. Its very presence ensured that this time, promises would be kept.